One of the things that's interesting about astrology today is that we have a bit of a hybrid practice that's unfolding. On the one hand, we have modern astrology that has been a lot of people's mainstay for a very long time. And then we have traditional astrology, which for the most part is fully back and intact. But for a lot of people, it is something that is still being integrated into their practice slowly, and the larger context within which they practice might still be a more modern framework. And I don't necessarily think that this is anybody's fault, but I do think that those of us who teach astrology, we are responsible largely for how our students understand certain concepts. So, for example, there's this idea within modern astrology that has no basis whatsoever within traditional astrology, not even in the slightest, least bit iota. And this idea is that the houses have a natural association with the signs that correspond with that same number. So therefore, people who have previously learned modern astrology tend to think that the first house has a relationship with Aries and also with Mars. And the second house has a relationship with Taurus and also with Venus. And the third house has a relationship with Mercury and also with Gemini. And the fourth house obviously would have a relationship with Cancer and also with the moon. This is a bit of a problem because one, not only is it not traditional astrology thinking whatsoever, but two, it is the invention of one woman in the 80s. Maybe it was even the 90s she invented it, but it was the invention of one woman who wanted to find a way to teach astrology as quickly as possible. Because back in the 80s and 90s, that is when we had this major mushrooming outward of the weekend workshop model. Hawayo Takata had just come to the mainland from Hawaii and was teaching Reiki in a weekend. So you could go and you could leave home on a Friday as an accountant and come back home Sunday evening as a healer. And the same thing that was going on with astrology, or the same thing that was going on within the Reiki world, was also happening in many other parts of the New Age movement. You leave home on Friday as a school teacher, you come back on Sunday as a shaman, basically. So this one woman wanted to find a way to teach astrology as quickly as possible, and so she devised a system that she called the 12-letter astrological alphabet. And this 12-letter astrological alphabet was the beginning of the end of all things sound astrologically. And this is also where we get this notion that the fourth house corresponds with the mother. Because within this lady's 12-letter astrological alphabet, we end up with Cancer corresponding with the fourth house, because Cancer is the fourth sign of the zodiac, and therefore it must also correspond with the mother, and therefore the fourth house must correspond with the mother. And those stupid ancients didn't know what they were talking about, because look, they didn't have this 12-letter astrological alphabet. And now me, smart lady in the 80s, creating something, I have rectified the error of the ancients, because apparently for 2,000 years, we were incorrect in our thought that the fourth house corresponded with the father and the 10th house corresponded with the mother. However, our astrology as a subject is hermetically sealed. And when we say that something is hermetically sealed, we mean that it's not to be messed with. I was going to say something else, but it's not to be screwed with, essentially. And one of the things, or one of the places where we get our understanding of the houses from, is from the Chaldean order of the planets. We know that the Chaldean order of the planets is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. The ancients took that classical organization of the planets and applied that to the 12 houses, and therefore we end up with Saturn corresponding with the physical reality, also corresponding with our first house, because the first house is where we inherit a physical body as our first inheritance or our first gift on this planet Earth. Then we end up with Jupiter corresponding with the second house, not Venus, but Jupiter corresponding with the second house, because the second house is a house of wealth. And when you are a baby with your Saturnian body, the first expression of wealth that you encounter is the warmth of your mother's breast milk. Therefore, the second house corresponded with Jupiter as per the Chaldean order and not Venus, because this idea that the 12 signs of the zodiac are somehow intrinsically related to the 12 houses is deeply incorrect. It's deeply, deeply incorrect. And I know some astrologers who I love and who I respect and who I cherish, but that's what they learned. And they're great astrologers. They're great, wonderful astrologers who deserve every single rose that they will ever be given. One such astrologer is a very famous medical astrologer, somebody who I think is really one of the best astrologers in the West at this moment. However, this person also believes in this 12-letter astrological alphabet and this 12-letter zodiac situation, because that is just what astrology was for the last 50, 60 years of astrological practice. So even in the light of new information, it's difficult for us to shake those foundations, even if we're the best astrologer in the world, because old habits die hard. And it doesn't matter what you say or what you do or what evidence you bring, it doesn't matter, because once a person believes what they believe it, and they're probably going to die believing that, especially if they've been doing that for decades of their life. So that's that. We then go on to Mars corresponding with the third house, because the ancients thought that Mars was the planet of our blood relatives and of our brethren, and particularly of our brothers. And therefore, the third house carries the association of brothers as a result of Mars, but the third house also carries this association of pilgrimages as a result of Mars as well, because Mars is a god of pilgrimages and prodigality and going out about your business on the road. All of these things we associate with Mars. I've gone through all of this explanation because I want to get to the fact that there's nothing lunar or watery about the fourth house, because the Chaldean order is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. Therefore, we end up with Saturn in the first house, Jupiter in the second house, Mars in the third house, and the Sun in the fourth house. And this is a part of why we, as traditional astrologers, still hold that the fourth house is the house of the father. The fourth house is the house of the father, not because somebody at some point in the ancient past just thought that was a nice idea, but because this idea that the fourth house is the house of the father is an extension of what is metaphysically sound from the perspective of applying the Chaldean order to the 12 houses. So when we get to the fourth house, we don't go Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Moon. We go Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun. Therefore, the fourth house is and has always and will always be associated with the father in traditional astrology. This is a point I speak about very in-depth in my book, Mastering Traditional Astrology, because every single thing that I thought a person could possibly need to know about traditional astrology in a way that is relevant to our practice of traditional astrology in the 21st century, I put in this book. Every single question that I anticipated the student could ask, because I've answered these questions for hundreds, if not thousands of students in the last 10 years, I put it in this book. Might be small, but it's part of information. And this, what I'm saying right now, is also present within this book. So this idea that the fourth house corresponds with the mother is just wrong. And similarly, this idea that the 12 houses within our birth chart correspond with the 12 signs of the zodiac is also wrong. And no one is to blame for that, if that's something that you've learned and if that's something that you've come to know over the course of your astrological lifestyle or over the course of your astrological career. But at some point, we have to, analyze where the information came from and be willing to step away from things if we find out that somebody in the 90s came up with this idea because she thought it was cool, versus 4,000 years of astrological tradition holding something as being a part of who we are. So the fourth house has no natural relationship with water, Neither does the fourth house have a natural relationship with the moon. Neither does the fourth house have a natural relationship with anything other than the sun, and by extension, the father, and by extension, our genealogy, and by extension, our family. And I think another way that we at Oraculos test and prove this again and again and again, and I'm not saying this is a foolproof way, but it's a way that I've tested and proven it over the years, is that when you have the ruler of the fourth house rising within your birth chart, you look more like your father. And when you have the ruler of the 10th house rising in your birth chart, because the 10th house is the house of the mother, you look more like your mom. And when you have both the ruler of the fourth house and the 10th house rising within your birth chart, you look more like the parent whose significator is closer to your ascendant, based on the fourth house being the house of the father and the 10th house being the house of the mother. So this is my understanding, and not only this is my understanding, but this is what traditional astrology understands as being true regarding the associations that we have within the houses. But the final thing I'll say on this is that planets do not naturally inherit anything for being in houses, especially in terms of the universal signification of those planets. So, for example, Venus represents love. Your love doesn't become family-based when you have Venus in the fourth house, for example. However, your family may be artistic as a result of having Venus in the fourth house. Similarly, Saturn represents blockages. Your money doesn't become something that you derive from real estate or construction work or working from the government when you have Saturn in the second house. Rather, the topic of money could be an area of blockage in your life as a result of having Saturn in the second house. Because when it comes to the universal nature of the planets, the universal nature of the planets impact the houses in which they inhabit, but the houses that planets inhabit don't impact that planet's universal nature. So planets don't necessarily inherit things from the house. Planets bestow things on the house, especially when it comes to what those planets signify from a universal perspective.